Civil War broke out because of the tensions between the northern and southern states, because there was a difference of opinion in racism and slavery. There was a start of the U.S. coming together because of the difference in opinions and how they had outlawed slavery. Similar to the North and the South, there was racism in the West. There's racism in the West, but it was more towards the Chinese, Indians, so on and so forth. The West was known as a place of unlimited opportunities because there's been nobody who squandered the land and people were attracted to the gold. Industrialization was a big step for the U.S. in a good and a bad way. Child labor had increased as well as women's labor because they were the cheaper workforce. Citizens have grown so much after industrialization and is translated to the modern day. Just because cities are getting bigger and people had been put in a bad spot and shown the downside of the cities and congestion. Later on, the tenement housing had improved along with a lot of health and safety precautions. Women had been allowed to vote in 1920, which opened doors for many people. In the 20s, the consumer market had doubled, and prohibition was during this era. Prohibition was a tough time for the United States, but when the consumer market started doubling, everybody enjoyed that time. Post-World War I, the Great Depression had put the United States into a major deficit because there was so much cost at hand with dealing with the war. FDR created jobs and urged people to invest back into banks. With the Great Depression, all the banks had gone down south, and we see that in the modern day now, that everywhere you look, people have the majority of their money in banks, and there's always credit cards or bankers and so on and so forth. So I think FDR was successful in that mission of reinvesting in banks. World War II began when Germany invaded Poland in 1939, and it ended in 1945. There's 50 million plus deaths, which is absolutely crazy. But it brought the world together in a weird way. It brought the world together just because of everybody was trying to come to the conclusion that they didn't want communism and a dictator everywhere. The innovation of tech in the United States in the 50s has really made the modern world what it is today. An example is the transistor. I think one of the biggest inventions is the Highway Act. It just allowed for 41,000 miles of highways. And the Cold War had been an important staple because communism isn't spread throughout the world. And then the United States had an effect on that. And then the last thing would be Martin Luther King and really making a breakthrough to racism, and how he had really set the precedent that racism is not a good thing, that everybody needed to be loved.